Stand by for insights so startling, you will never look at the news the same way again. Just pay attention. You will understand everything happening if you pay attention. You are now on the cutting edge. Genuine born-again Christians have normally not given King Solomon's temple much thought, for we realize that Jesus Christ fulfilled all the types and shadows of the Old Testament law, of which the third temple was an integral part. Jesus foretold in Matthew 24 that the glorious Herodian temple, which was modeled after the Solomon temple, will be totally destroyed. Listen. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. That is Matthew chapter 24 verse 2. History records that this temple, which has so impressed Jesus' disciples, was destroyed in AD 70. 70 AD. It was destroyed by the Roman army that had laid siege to the city. Further, even though the soldiers were under strict orders to not destroy the temple, they set fire to it and caused that fire to burn so hot for so long and so thoroughly that the stones heated hot enough to turn the gold liquid from flowing out of even the mortars of the bricks. When the fire cooled, Jesus' prophecy was exactly fulfilled. In the New Testament epistles, neither Paul nor other apostles emphasized the temple. In fact, they virtually ignored it. The writer to the Hebrews made it quite clear that the covenant of Jesus Christ completely abolished the first covenant, of which the magnificent temple was such an important part. Listen to Hebrews. Now, if perfection, which means a personal relationship between God and the worshipper, had been attainable by Levitical priesthood, for under it the people were given the law, why was it further necessary that there should arise another and different kind of priest, one after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one appointed after the order and rank of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is of a necessity an alteration in the law concerning priesthood as well. Hebrews chapter 7 verse 11 to 12. This passage makes it quite obvious that God considered the first covenant to be defective and in their need of replacement. And when you change the covenant, you change the priesthood and the law concerning the priesthood. It does not take too much imagination to realize that if God was going to change the first covenant and abolish its priesthood, he would abolish the temple as well. For this reason, we read of God's action taken when Jesus was hanging on the cross, immediately after he gave up the ghost. Let's read. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. Matthew chapter 27 verse 51. Just note that. God supernaturally ripped the temple curtain, separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which the sanctuary was filled with parishioners worshipping during the annual sacrifice for the sins of the Israel. Suddenly, they must have been filled with shock and fear as God abruptly ripped the curtain, throwing the Holy of Holies wide open. Many of them must have feared death, for no one could enter the Holy of Holies and live, except for the high priest, and he only once a year. Tearing the curtain in two was God's signal that the first covenant with its temple and priesthood was now irrelevant and was now to be replaced by his second covenant through Jesus Christ. The writer to the Hebrews picked up this theme. In keeping with the oath's greater strength and force, Jesus has become the guarantee of a better, stronger agreement, a more excellent and more advantageous covenant. Hebrews chapter 7 verse 22. Again, Hebrews says, when God speaks of a new covenant or agreement, he makes the first one obsolete, out of use. And what is obsolete, out of use, and annulled because of age is ripe for disappearance and to be dispensed with altogether. Hebrews chapter 8 verse 13. Did you catch that? Did you catch what I just said? Ripe for disappearance and to be dispensed with altogether. Annulled. Anything about the first temple has been cut off. Therefore, genuine Christians have virtually ignored the Solomon and Herodian temples, except to arrive at a proper understanding of the Old Testament covenant. We certainly understand that God destroyed the temple because he had instituted the superior second covenant through the new superior high priest, Jesus Christ. To us, the Solomon temple is just an interesting piece of ancient history. But not so with pagan Freemasons. Yes, not so with those pagan Freemasons. In their religion, the temple plays a very, very important role. Masons declare Freemasonry to be a religion. Let us stop here for a moment to dispense with the current Masonic lie that their organization is not a religion. Let us review some notes. I read. Every Masonic lodge is a temple of religion, and its teachings are an instruction in religion. This is quoted from Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike, page 231. We continue. It, that's Masonry, is the universal, eternal, immutable religion, such as God planted it in the heart of universal humanity. IBID page 219/M. I continue again. But the Masonic organization in which these legends were cherished, like Masonic lodges today, were religious bodies. The Holy Bible, the Great Light in Masonry, King James Version, Temple Illustrated Edition, A.J. Holman Company, 1968, page 26. I read further. Masonry may rightfully claim to be called a religious institution. Read the book, A New and Revised Edition, an encyclopedia of Freemasonry and its kindred sciences by Albert Mackay, MD, 33, volume 2, page 618. Okay, let's continue. Do not be deceived, brothers. Do not be deceived. Freemasonry is a religion. It is actually a religion. The Freemasonry, it is actually a religion. Freemasonry, yeah. Now we get back to Solomon's temple. The Solomon's temple is the heart and soul of Freemasonry. So I want you to get where the picture is. God has nothing to do with the first temple and the first covenant anymore. Why are the Freemasons interested to build a temple for Israel? Why? Let's continue. Now that we have amply demonstrated that the genuine Christian has no close affinity to Solomon's temple because he destroyed it and annulled the Levitical priesthood that accompanied it, let us examine how important this temple is to the practice of the Masonic religion. I read. Of all the objects which constitute the Masonic science of symbolism, the most important, the most cherished by the Mason, and by far most significant, is the Temple of Jerusalem. Did you hear that? I continue. The spiritualizing of the temple is the first, the most prominent, and the most pervading of all symbols of Freemasonry. Take from Freemasonry its dependence on the temple. Leave out of its ritual and all references to that sacred edifice and to the regions and traditions connected with it. And the system itself would at once decay, die. Read Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert Mackay, MD 33, and Charles T. McClellan, 33 revised edition by Edward L. Hawkins, 30, and the William J. Huffans, Volume 2, MZ, published by Masonry History Company, Chicago, New York, London, 1873, A. G. Mackay, 1927, by Masonry History Company. Let us repeat the critical understanding that the noted 33 degrees Masonry author, Albert Mackay, has just given us. Take from Freemasonry its dependent on the temple. Leave out of its ritual all references to that sacred edifice and to the legends and traditions connected with it, and the system itself would at once decay and die. Therefore, the first understanding we want you to grasp is that Freemasonry is absolutely, completely, 100% devoted to the Solomon Temple, without which the entire structure and foundation of Freemasonry will die. Thus does Masonry stand in stark contrast to genuine biblical Christianity. In other words, Freemasonry is rooted at a deepest foundation to the first covenant of the Old Testament, while biblical Christianity is rooted to the second covenant of Jesus as delineated in the New Testament. Mackay makes this fact quite clear also. Let's read. Masonry has derived its temple symbolism, as it has almost all its symbolic ideas, from the Hebrew type, IBID. Since the Old Testament was originally written in the Hebrew and the New Testament in the Greek, Mackay is clearly stating that Freemasonry is rooted in the Old Testament. In the Masonic Bible quoted above, the Temple Illustrated Edition, the author of the foreword shed some further light upon the importance of Solomon's Temple to the Freemasonry. Are you getting something? Are you listening? Just listen carefully. I continue to read. The traditions and romance of King Solomon's Temple are of great interest to everyone who reads the Bible. They are of transcendent importance to Masons. The temple is the outstanding symbol in Masonry, and the legendary story of the building of the temple is the fundamental basis of the Masonic rule and guide to conduct in life. The cream of Masonic historical and philosophical writing has been drawn upon his description of temple and its relation to Masonic ritual. These were quoted from The Great Light in Masonry, King James Version, Temple Illustrated Edition, A.J. Holman Company, 1968, forward entitled The Bible and King Solomon's Temple in Masonry by John Wesley Kelkner. Let us review the important segment now. I read. The traditions and romance of King Solomon's Temple are of transcendent importance to Masons. The word transcendent is used by genuine biblical Christianity to describe God himself. Just like the dictionary explains, God is truly transcendent, to pass beyond the limit that humans can grasp, to exist above independently of material experience or the universe. In other words, Solomon's Temple is to the Freemason what God is to the genuine Christian. Thus, belief in Solomon's Temple transcends of all Freemasonry itself. existing above and independently of it. Masonry has replaced its transcendent faith in a building that the true God himself destroyed, not once but twice. Spiritualizing Solomon's Temple. Spiritualizing Solomon's Temple. Starting at the end of the quote from the Temple Illustrated Edition Bible, above we read, "In all the rich symbolism of ancient craft masonry, two symbols or symbolic themes predominate. One is the search for light. The other is the labor of building. The source of light is the Holy Bible, and the grand representation of the builder's art is King Solomon's temple. It was natural that imaginative stone masons, long before the development of anything like our modern fraternity, should have felt a kinship with the great builders of all ages. It was natural also that they should have acknowledged a peculiar attraction for the most famous and glorious of all building enterprises, King Solomon's temple and citadel. Interest and attraction for the wonderful structure on Mount Moriah have increased rather than diminished. Until today, the Temple of Solomon is the spiritual home of every Mason." Quote from Masonic Holy Bible, Temple Illustrated Edition, A.J. Holman Company, 1968, page 11 to 14. A short while later, these authors explain, I read, "King Solomon's temple was the perfect architectural expression of the religious faith of the people." That's page 25. Perhaps Masonic interest also increased from a more or less incidental notice of the temple to a final preoccupation with it as a symbol of spiritual man. Page 29, emphasis added. Indeed, Masonic leadership has spiritualized the meaning of the temple in the life of each and every Mason. Albert McKay explains, "To the master Masons, the Temple of Solomon is truly the symbol of human life. It becomes a fit symbol of human life occupied in the search after divine truth, which is nowhere to be found. Such is the symbolism of the first temple, that of Solomon, as familiar to the class of master Masons." This is from Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, Mackey, page 774, emphasis added. However, while Solomon's temple is the symbol of mortal human life to the master Mason, a higher class of Masons ascribe a different interpretation to the yet another temple. Listen to McKay explain. Listen. "But there is a second and higher class of the fraternity, the Masons of the Royal Ark, by whom this temple symbolism is still further developed. This second class, leaving their early symbolism and looking beyond this temple of Solomon, find in scriptural history another temple, which years after the destruction of the first one was erected upon its reign. And they have selected the second temple, the temple of Zerubbabel, as their prominent symbol. And as the first class of Masons find in their temple the symbol of mortal life, limited and perishable, they, on the contrary, see in this second temple, built upon the foundation of the first, a symbol of life eternal, where the lost truth shall be found, where new incense shall arise from a new altar, and whose perpetuity their great master had promised, when in the very spirit of symbolism he exclaimed, 'Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I raise it up.'" And so, to these two classes of orders of Masons, the symbol of the temple presents itself in a connected and continuous form. To the master Mason, the Temple of Solomon is the symbol of this life. To the Royal Ark Mason, the Temple of Zerubbabel is the symbol of the future life. To the former, his temple is the symbol of the search for truth. To the latter, his is the symbol of discovery of truth. And thus, the circle is completed and the system made perfect. IBID, pages 774 to 775. Emphasis added. The temple is so very important to the Masons that he took the final step to spiritualize its meaning. Master Masons looked upon Solomon's temple as their symbol of human life, while Royal Ark Mason considered the inferior temple of Zerubbabel as a symbol of eternal life. The two symbols taken together form a spiritual circle, thus perfecting the Masonic symbolic system. Now you can understand how the Temple of Solomon became such transcendent issue for the Mason. Now we are looking at logical conclusion of this transcendent belief in Solomon's temple. Since Freemasonry reverences Solomon's temple so very much, and since this temple holds such a preeminent position in all of Freemasonry, from its foundation to its very roof, it is much of a stretch to understand that Freemasons might fervently desire to rebuild Solomon's temple, the only place on earth it can possibly be built, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Let us examine some of these writings to see the fervent desire of Freemasons to rebuild Solomon's temple. The Freemasons have at all events seized with avidity the idea of representing in their symbolic language the interior and spiritual man by a material temple. The great body of the Masonic craft, looking only to the first temple erected by wisdom of King Solomon, made it the symbol of life, and as the great object of Masonry is the search after truth. They are directed to build up this temple as a fitting receptacle for truth. This is from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert McKay, MD, 33 degrees, and Charles T. McClellan, 33, revised edition by Edward L. Hawkins, 30, and William J. Huffens, 32, volume 2, M to Z, published by Masonry History Company, Chicago, New York, London, 1873 AG, McKay, 1927, by the Masonic History Company, page 774. The word avidity is defined as eagerness, greed. Therefore, we can see that they are directed to build up this temple with eagerness and greediness. McKay then goes on to talk about this new temple and some of its new features. Let's read. New incense shall arise from a new altar, and whose perpetuity their great master had promised when in the very spirit of symbolism he exclaimed, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. IBID. We read further. New incense arising from a new altar in a temple that McKay has just associated with a great master mason, Jesus Christ. In other words, McKay has linked the new temple with a Christ or Messianic figure. In another book, Masonic author Edward White is even more explicit. Listen. The temple of Masonry is henceforward the house of Christ. Imagine where they are driving it. Edward White, page 486 to 87. A new encyclopedia of Freemasonry and of cognate instituted mysteries, the right literature and history. Volume 2, reprinted in 1970 by Walter Vane Books, page 314. The new Solomon's temple is henceforth to be called the house of Christ. Are you listening? Are you listening? Do you know that the term Christ literally means the office of the promised Messiah? Jesus fulfilled that office when he lived and ministered among men, and he was recognized as having fulfilled that messianic office. Listen as I read again. And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art Christ, the Son of the living God. That is Matthew chapter 16, verse 16. Notice, Peter said, "Thou art the Christ." In other words, Peter recognized that Jesus was the divine human fulfillment of this office of Messiah. We read further. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. That's Matthew chapter 26, verse 63. The high priest asked Jesus point blank if he was the fulfillment of that messianic office. Let's read. The people were in expectation, and all men mused in their hearts of John, whether he were the Christ or not. That's Luke chapter 3, verse 15. Even the common Jew understood this distinction between the office, the Christ, and the man who would fill it. However, the Bible says that another Christ shall arise, and he shall be the Antichrist, or one who comes in the guise of Christ, pretending to be the Messiah. Unfortunately, most of the people living at that time will be deceived into believing him to be Messiah and will enthusiastically follow him. Revelation chapter 13, verse 3b to 4. Hope you are listening. Since Masonry is a counterfeit Christianity, it seems logical that Mackay and Waite might be talking about Antichrist, not Jesus Christ. Therefore, Waite really said, listen. The temple of Masonry is henceforward the house of Antichrist. If plans are really afoot to rebuild Solomon's temple, it will be for the Antichrist, not Jesus Christ. And the Bible foretells just this kind of event. Does it not? Listen, let's read. And many false prophets will rise up and deceive many into error. That's verse 11 of Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. So when you see the appalling sacrilege, the abomination that astonishes and makes desolate, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, that's Matthew 24, 15. At this point, Jesus is quoting Daniel 9:27 and 11:31 and also 12:11, in which the Antichrist will go into the Holy of Holies and commit the abomination that causes desolation. The Apostle Paul gives us more insight as to why the Antichrist actions are so offensive to God. Let's read. And the man of lawlessness, sin, is revealed, who is the son of doom, of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself so proudly and insolently against and over all that is called God or that is worshipped, even to his actually taking his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming that he himself is God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3b to 4. Matthew 24:15 suddenly depicts Antichrist walking into the Holy of Holies to declare himself to be God and proudly demanding that he be worshipped as God. Revelation 13:15 tells us that Antichrist will actually erect an image created in his likeness. This image will not only be able to speak, but will possess the supernatural power to kill anyone who does not worship it. Now we understand. Antichrist will walk into a rebuilt temple, standing on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, declare himself to be God, demand to be worshipped as such, and erect a talking image made in his likeness. Wow. Hope you're listening, Christians. Therefore, the rebuilt temple of which Jesus foretells is directly linked to Antichrist. Why should we be surprised to learn from White that the temple of Masonry is henceforward the house of Christ? Why? This planned new temple shall be the temple of Antichrist in complete fulfillment of the scripture. We're still looking at building another temple in Jerusalem. Let's read. In the high grades of Masonry, we hear of a secret intention to build yet another temple at Jerusalem. Author Edward White, page 486 to 87. a new encyclopedia of Freemasonry and Cognate Institute Mysteries, the Rites, Literature and History, Volume 2, reprinted in 1970 by Wed Tavane Books.